In a feel-good Rebirth novel, there exists a seemingly minor canon fodder character. Tang Cheng, who once schemed to marry her beloved prince, suddenly finds herself engaged to the heir of the Duke of Zhenguo, a man known for his difficulty in fathering children. But just 1 month later, she becomes pregnant. And that is where a heartwarming and unexpected love story begins. But in this story, Tang Cheng is no longer the blind canon fodder. She is a transmigrator, from an interstellar empire, unaware of the tragic fate the original character once faced. When handed a dark vial of abortion medicine, she simply smiles, throws it away, and vows to protect the little life within her. When Huaiyan, the heir admired by countless noble ladies, now stands beside Tang Cheng, a man once believed to be childless, finds his destiny changed by a woman who brings him miracles. From a marriage of schemes grows a family envied by the world. This is the journey from canon fodder to the true mistress of happiness, a tale filled with warmth and unexpected turns. You're listening to the story on Galaxxy romance novel. If you enjoy it, don't forget to like, share, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you won't miss the next chapters. The Marquis of Nanyang's residence. The Marquis of Nanyang had only just returned to his residence when the steward came to report. His eyes narrowed slightly. The Duke of Zhenguo is here? How rare. Since the Duke had personally come, the Marquis had no choice but to go out and receive him. As soon as Huaiyan, handsome and elegant as ever, saw the Marquis striding over with his steward and attendants, he respectfully cupped his hands and bowed. This junior pays his respects to the Marquis. The Marquis let out a cold snort, casting only a brief glance at Huaiyan before shifting his gaze to the Duke of Zhenguo, whose handsome features bore a striking resemblance to Huaiyan's. At the sight of the Duke, the Marquis couldn't help recalling how the Duke's wife had mistreated his beloved daughter. His expression instantly turned cold. "Your Grace, what a rare guest indeed. Let's speak inside." This time, the Marquis did not leave them waiting at the gate. The Duke's personal visit had already shown enough respect to both him and his precious daughter. Though the Marquis wore a frosty expression, he didn't make things difficult beyond that. The Duke's lips curved faintly into a smile. With Huaiyan, the official matchmaker, and guards carrying lavish betrothal gifts behind him, he prepared to step through the gates. "Hold it, there's no need to bring those inside," the Marquis said, his brows tightly furrowed. The Duke paused mid-step. Noting the Marquis's unpleasant expression, he sighed inwardly and raised his hand to signal a halt. "Leave them there for now," the Marquis said. Huaiyan couldn't help but smile bitterly as he noticed that after his respectful greeting, the Marquis hadn't spared him a single glance. "If even with Father personally stepping in we still fail this time." From a distance, the crowd trailing behind them erupted in whispers when they saw the Duke of Zhenguo backing down in front of the Marquis of Nanyang. Just yesterday, the Duke's wife had brought the official matchmaker herself and hadn't even been allowed past the gate. Yet today the Duke had come in person. This fourth Miss Tang was practically soaring to the heavens. While the onlookers were full of envy, many also felt indignant. Since when could a brainless, ill-reputed, incompetent girl like her attract the attention of someone as powerful as the Duke of Zhenguo? Enough for him to personally arrange a marriage proposal for his son. The crowd buzzed with speculation. Word spread quickly, and before long, the hearts of countless noble ladies who had long admired young master lay in shattered pieces. At this point, no one outside knew that the Duchess had been sent back to her natal home early that morning. Everyone simply assumed she had stormed off in anger, unable to accept how much the Duke favored fourth Miss Tang. The Duke's household made no effort to clarify the situation. If the truth were to get out, the public would surely brand Tang Cheng a femme fatale. The engagement hasn't even been settled, and the future mother-in-law has already been sent packing. Utterly unbelievable. The main hall, Marquis of Nanyang's residence. Madame Zhang, the Marchioness of Nanyang, was visibly startled by the powerful presence the Duke of Zhenguo exuded the moment he entered. After paying her respects, she quickly ordered servants to serve the Duke tea. But inwardly, she was anything but calm. That fourth Mrs. Fortune is simply too good. So good it's maddening. Madame Zhang composed herself quickly and summoned Chan Momo, instructing her to go to Peony Garden and invite fourth Miss over. "Marquis, fourth Miss will be here shortly." The Marquis gave a slight nod and gestured for her to sit. Then he turned to the Duke and his son. This concerns my daughter. We'll speak once she arrives. As the host wishes, the Duke replied without objection. It was common knowledge that the Marquis doted on his fourth daughter. Rumors had been rampant yesterday that Tang Cheng had suffered a miscarriage. Under normal circumstances, she should still be too weak to receive guests today. And yet, the Marquis made no attempt to shield her from the meeting, something worth pondering. The Duke's gaze sharpened slightly as a sudden suspicion crept into his mind. Perhaps Tang Cheng hadn't lost the child after all. But then he recalled the tonic meant to strengthen the body, and that fleeting hope was quickly extinguished. When Huayan didn't object either. He hadn't seen Tang Cheng yesterday and wanted to see her himself, to ask her directly about the miscarriage. The Marquis of Nanyang gave the Duke of Zhenguo a faint smile. He knew perfectly well what this calculating Duke was thinking, but he didn't care. In fact, he was doing it on purpose. While they waited, the two men tacitly avoided mentioning Tang Cheng, and instead discussed matters of the court. By the time a cup of tea had passed, Tang Cheng entered, dressed in a striking red silk gown. With a bold presence and 4 elegant maids trailing behind her, she immediately spotted the 2 most eye-catching figures in the hall. She recognized Wen Huayan right away. His exceptional good looks left a lasting impression. As for the other man, there was no need for introductions. That had to be the powerful Duke of Zhenguo. Tang Cheng couldn't help but glance at him a few more times, curious. The Duke sat upright, sipping tea at a leisurely pace, his imposing aura carefully concealed. At the moment, he looked every bit the refined and handsome gentleman. Those genes really are something. Her child was bound to be good-looking too. Tang Cheng's lips curved into a slight smile as she withdrew her gaze and walked lightly toward the Marquis. Father, mother, I'm here. Madame Zhang smiled gently. The Marquis, seeing his bright and confident daughter, couldn't help but soften. Cheng-er, come greet the Duke of Zhenguo. Upon hearing her father, Tang Cheng stepped forward with poise and grace, offering a respectful bow to the Duke of Zhenguo. Greetings, Your Grace. The Duke's lips curved in a faint smile as he took out a white jade pendant, smooth as mutton fat. A small gift to mark our first meeting. Tang Cheng accepted it without hesitation, flashing a bright smile. Thank you, Your Grace. We're all family, no need for such formality, the Duke replied with a warm smile. The Marquis of Nanyang gave a cold snort, clearly irritated by the Duke's overly familiar tone and pleasant demeanor. Your Grace, isn't it a bit early to be saying that? The Duke chuckled softly and said nothing, simply raising his teacup for a sip. It was only a matter of time before Tang Cheng entered the gates of the Zhenguo Duke's residence. Though he had heard many rumors about her, this was his first time seeing her in person. She was truly a stunning young woman, bright, bold, and striking. Her fair skin, clear apricot eyes, and proud, confident demeanor made her stand out at first glance. She was nothing like the rumors described. In fact, she held her own even among the daughters of noble families. Of course, that was just surface level. What lay beneath required time to truly understand. Still, the Duke of Zhenguo found his first impression of Tang Cheng rather satisfactory. As a seasoned general who had spent years on the battlefield and was highly attuned to the scent of blood, he noticed something crucial. Tang Cheng carried no trace of it. Her complexion was rosy and vibrant, her energy strong and healthy. That told him all he needed to know. Whatever reason the Marquis of Nanyang had for spreading the miscarriage rumor, the Duke had no intention of exposing it. Tang Cheng and the Marquis had no idea that their entire act had been seen through in an instant by a man who had witnessed more bloodshed than most could imagine. Meanwhile, she was casually toying with the white jade pendant in her hand, clearly in good spirits. Father, life is full of surprises, she said lightly. The Marquis was momentarily at a loss for words. Miss Tang is absolutely right, the Duke said with a glance at the Marquis, nodding with a smile and uttering a blatant lie without missing a beat. Miss Tang is well-read, composed, and carries herself with admirable grace. She already has the presence of a future matriarch. Tang Cheng couldn't help but let out a laugh. By this era's standards, her behavior could be considered quite rebellious. But Tang Cheng had never been one to wrong herself just to fit expectations. The Duke of Zhenguo truly was going above and beyond for his son, forcing himself to turn a blind eye, feign ignorance, and praise her against his better judgment. Poor Duke. He really was trying his best. She cast a teasing glance at Wen Huaiyan, her beautiful apricot eyes sparkling with amusement. Wen Huaiyan's handsome face froze for a moment, then he quickly composed himself and solemnly echoed his father's words. Father is absolutely right. Tang Cheng, thoroughly pleased, accepted their compliments without a shred of modesty. Your Grace and the young master clearly have great taste. Most people are blind. They never see the hidden gems in me. The phrase cultured and well-mannered was practically invented for me. I read, I write, and I give great gifts. That makes me the very definition of cultured and well-mannered. The Duke of Zhenguo couldn't help but spit out his tea. She really did know how to twist words and spin logic to her advantage. Wen Huaiyan nearly choked on his own tea, quickly lifting his cup to his lips in an attempt to cover his amusement. Tang Cheng was just too cheeky. Madame Zhang, who had been quiet as a mouse, suddenly jerked her hand. The tea in her cup nearly spilled. She had been planning to find a gentle, well-mannered, and traditionally educated bride for her son. Now she was silently scratching cultured and well-mannered off the list. This fourth girl was a force of nature. The Marquis of Nanyang's mouth twitched. The phrase cultured and well-mannered had just been completely redefined by his precious daughter. Now he couldn't even look at the words without flinching. If this conversation ever got out, the rigid scholars outside would tear them apart with their rhetoric. Everyone else in the hall was stunned into silence. The four maidservants covered their faces. Miss, what kind of twisted logic was that? Tang Cheng beamed at the room, watching their various expressions with delight. Her mood was sky-high. Miss Tang, what brilliant insight! The Duke of Zhenguo pretended he hadn't just spat out his tea, giving her a look of exaggerated admiration. Wen Huaiyan, catching the half-smile on the Marquis's face, couldn't help but press a hand to his forehead. Father, your dignity is in ruins. Tang Cheng blinked her apricot eyes wide. So this is the real Duke of Zhenguo? Tang Cheng was honestly surprised, but in a good way. She found herself liking this version of him. Unlike the Duchess, who even when lowering her stance still carried an air of superiority, the Duke didn't seem to look down on her. The disdain and contempt in the Duchess's eyes had always been hard to miss, even when she tried to hide it. Not to mention how she'd later torn off all pretenses during the annulment. The Duke's lips curved slightly. What a delightful little girl. Wen Huaiyan's handsome eyes were fixed intently on Tang Cheng. His lips twitched with amusement as he asked with interest, "And how do you handle social interactions?" Tang Cheng smiled sweetly. Handling social interactions means sitting at home, welcoming guests and accepting their gifts. Duke, you truly have a discerning eye. You could tell I have the makings of a household matriarch. After all, I'm good at both giving and receiving gifts. She finished with a dazzling, radiant smile directed right at the Duke. The Duke's smile froze. His lips twitched. He suddenly wanted to sit quietly and reflect on life. So the rumors outside said forth Miss Tang was an airhead fool? In his opinion, the real fools were the ones spreading those rumors. Wen Huaiyan had to stifle his laughter. This was the first time he'd ever seen his father at a complete loss for words. Everyone else in the hall stared in stunned silence. The official matchmaker, who had yet to serve any real purpose, was left completely dazed by Miss Tang's absurd but oddly convincing reasoning. The Marquis of Nanyang burst into hearty laughter. Well said. You truly are your father's daughter. Tang Cheng beamed. With praise like that, father, you're making me blush. The Duke of Zhenguo. Ahem. He was beginning to realize that this future daughter-in-law of his had a rather thick skin. Wen Huaiyan. Blushing? He didn't see even a hint of it. What's with that look, Wen Huaiyan? Tang Cheng shot him a glare. Wen Huaiyan rubbed his nose and cleared his throat. A look of awe. You looked stunning just now when you smiled. Tang Cheng's face grew warm. She lifted her chin with pride. Obviously. I was born beautiful. Grace and charm are in my bones. Wen Huaiyan smiled like clear skies after rain, handsome as ever, like a living jade sculpture. That's the plain truth. Tang Cheng's eyes narrowed into crescent-shaped smiles as she found herself liking Wen Huaiyan more and more. I'm the type of person who loves to hear the truth. Madame Zhang twitched her mouth in discomfort. The four maidservants. The young lady is so easy to please. The Marquis of Nanyang shot her a disapproving look. Flattery is never a good sign. The Duke of Zhenguo lowered his head to sip his tea, completely ignoring the Marquis's words. He hadn't expected his son to be so skilled at charming young women. "Father, Wen Huaiyan really isn't bad," Tang Cheng said cheerfully, surprising everyone by speaking up for him. Wen Huaiyan's lips curved into a playful smile. The Marquis of Nanyang felt a bit uneasy. Wen Huaiyan was like a little fox. His precious daughter didn't even realize she was being flattered. The Marquis of Nanyang couldn't help but shoot Wen Huaiyan a glare. After all the pleasantries, it was time to get to the point. The Duke of Zhenguo's expression turned serious. The hall fell silent in an instant. Madame Zhang's spirits lifted. Finally, it was happening. Looking at the Duke of Zhenguo's attitude toward Tang Cheng, it seemed he had already accepted her. Madame Zhang thought about her daughter, whose mindset seemed increasingly unbalanced, and worry filled her heart. She could only hope that the princess consort would take a liking to ex-Siner. Tang Cheng looked on with interest. As soon as she saw the matchmaker, she knew the Duke's purpose in coming. With all the rumors about her swirling outside, the Duke of Zhenguo was not deterred by public gossip and had humbled himself to personally propose. Tang Cheng felt moved by this. However, while she was touched, it didn't mean she would simply accept the proposal. The Duke's wife had clearly shown her dislike for Tang Cheng, and she wasn't the type to court trouble for herself. "My daughter and young master Wen just broke off their engagement 3 days ago, and now the Duke is here to propose again. Isn't this a bit too much of a joke? Does the Duke's wife agree with this? Has the Duke forgotten the circumstances under which your wife came to call off the engagement?" The smile on Marquis of Nanyang's face faded as he set his teacup on the table, his tone one of subtle amusement. With 3 questions in a row, the Duke of Zhenguo silently noted yet another mark against his wife, wondering if there had ever been a more troublesome mother. "It's all my fault. I failed to properly discipline my wife. I'm here to offer my sincerest apologies to you all," the Duke of Zhenguo said, straightforwardly taking the blame for his wife's actions. Tang Cheng blinked her almond-shaped eyes, a look of disapproval on her face as she spoke up in defense of the Duke. "Your Grace, you can't do that. While it's true that husband and wife are one, it doesn't mean you can control your wife's thoughts and actions. Taking all the blame for her mistakes is just foolish. We are all people who can distinguish right from wrong," she added with conviction. Wen Huaiyan, hearing Tang Cheng call his usually stern father foolish, made Wen Huaiyan want to laugh, but it also warmed his heart. In fact, what she said was right. His father had no reason to apologize for his wife's actions. It was the first time he had ever been called foolish by such a beautiful young lady, and the Duke of Zhenguo was at a loss whether to laugh or cry. Marquis of Nanyang held back a laugh as he took a sip from his teacup. "Your Grace, my daughter is right. You can't apologize for your wife. This marriage isn't about feuding. Every parent loves their children, and it's not wrong for the Duke's wife to care for young Master One, nor is it wrong for her to dislike my daughter. But she shouldn't have burned bridges and insulted my daughter after calling off the engagement. That's why I don't think it's a good idea for my daughter to marry into the Duke's household." The Marquis of Nanyang words were sharp, showing no consideration for the Duke's wife. In truth, he had originally been quite willing to marry his precious daughter into the Duke's household, but after the Duke's wife rushed to break the engagement as soon as young Master One had recovered, it had been too much. The Marquis of Nanyang had been holding back his anger for a long time. On the other hand, Madame Zhang silently grumbled to herself. What was all this talk about parents loving their children? Wasn't the Marquis only indulging and favoring the 4th girl, leaving the rest of them aside? The Duke of Zhenguo was well prepared and in a low voice countered, "I sent my wife back to her family this morning." The room fell silent in shock. So, the Duke's wife had been sent away to her family this morning by the Duke himself? The news was shocking. Tang Cheng was also stunned. She looked at Wen Huaiyan for confirmation, and he nodded slightly. Tang Cheng raised an eyebrow. It seemed that the Duke of Zhenguo had come prepared. The Marquis of Nanyang was momentarily stunned, narrowing his eyes and asking sharply, "When will you bring her back?" The Duke of Zhenguo met his gaze, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He spoke calmly, "I will bring her back when she sincerely accepts Miss Tang as my daughter-in-law. When Miss Tang marries into the Duke's family, I guarantee she will not suffer any injustice. Wen Huaiyan also promises that there will be no other women besides Miss Tang." Everything Tang Cheng had said yesterday had reached the Duke's ears. The Duke of Zhenguo found it of little consequence. The young girl was simply possessive. When his son's body was weak and frail before starting his course of strength-enhancing medicine, the Duke had already prepared himself to adopt a younger branch of the family to serve as his heir. Tang Cheng was an unexpected surprise. Even though his son's health had improved, allowing him to take many women to bear children, the issue of heirs wasn't so easily solved. If Tang Cheng could conceive when his son's body was weak, it would be even easier now. Why go the long way around? Not to mention, Tang Cheng was already carrying his grandchild. As for the future of his son's harem, the Duke of Zhenguo had no concerns. If his son didn't care, then neither did he. This was the difference between being a mother-in-law and a father-in-law. The mother-in-law wants her husband to have only one woman, but is eager to give her son multiple wives. Father is right. Before the engagement was called off, I had promised Tang Cheng that she would be the only woman in my life, and that will never change. When Huaiyan publicly vowed, Tang Cheng, in high spirits, quietly placed Wen Huaiyan at the top of her list of potential husbands. The Duke of Zhenguo and Wen Huaiyan were clearly very attentive to Tang Cheng, even causing the official matchmaker to be taken aback. Miss Tang Cheng was truly fortunate. Now, it seemed the Marquis of Nanyang would likely agree to the match. The official matchmaker turned her gaze to the Marquis of Nanyang. Madame Zhang also looked to her husband. Honestly, if the Duke of Zhenguo hadn't taken an interest in Tang Cheng, she might have eagerly married off her own daughter, Tang Xine, to him. The four maidservants also looked to the Marquis. The Marquis of Nanyang smiled faintly. The Duke and young master would indeed show great sincerity, but such an important decision should be made with caution. After all, if the Duke's wife decides to cancel the engagement again, where would my daughter's reputation stand? Everyone was taken aback. Right, there was still the matter of the Duke's wife. The hopeful expressions of the crowd faded. Though the Duke of Zhenguo was disappointed, but at least the Marquis of Nanyang's stance was no longer so firm. The Duke of Zhenguo was preparing to continue persuading the Marquis of Nanyang. Tang Cheng watched as her father and the Duke of Zhenguo engaged in another round of negotiation. Unable to resist, she moved over to sit beside Wen Huaiyan, lightly nudging him with her hand. She lowered her voice and asked softly, "Do you really want to marry me?" Wen Huaiyan smiled and nodded. With them sitting close together, a faint fragrance drifted toward him. His mind briefly wandered, and he replied in a low voice imitating her tone, "Yes, if you don't marry me, not only would it be a waste of a strong body tonic, but it would also let other women take advantage." Wen Huaiyan was very sly. Tang Cheng smiled, nodding in agreement. "You're right, I certainly can't let other women take advantage. That would be too much of a loss." Wen Huaiyan's smile deepened, like a big wolf tempting a little rabbit. "That's why we should make things official, so everyone knows I'm already taken." Tang Cheng's smile was sweet and bright. "No, I think it's better to make sure you can't function properly." Wen Huaiyan's smile froze. How ruthless. Ha 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 ha. At some point, the Marquis of Nanyang and the Duke of Zhenguo stopped their argument and overheard the amusing conversation between the two. Their expressions were mixed. The Marquis of Nanyang laughed heartily, feeling thoroughly entertained, while the Duke of Zhenguo's mouth twitched. He shot his son a look filled with exasperation and disappointment. Wen Huaiyan. His son was hopeless, so the Duke of Zhenguo decided to take matters into his own hands. "Cheng girl, look at all these messy rumors spreading outside. People care deeply about their reputation. Finding a husband who is both virtuous and more attentive to you than Huaiyan would be like climbing to the heavens. You'd better seize the person in front of you and settle things quickly." Marquis of Nanyang. Tang Cheng lifted her face and looked at the Duke of Zhenguo. "But I think this is quite good. There's no marriage contract binding us. If Wen Huaiyan really falls for someone else, I'll wish him all the best. I'm a very generous person when it comes to men who aren't mine." Wen Huaiyan. The Duke of Zhenguo paused. So all that effort he put in meant nothing. "Actually, you don't have to go to such lengths, you don't have to compromise so much. Let me tell you the truth. The child inside me is really gone." Tang Cheng lied without blinking. The child was gone. Wen Huaiyan's heart twisted with pain, a faint mist of tears glimmering in his eyes. He understood Tang Cheng's choice. They had already broken off the engagement, and she didn't want to keep the child. He couldn't blame her, fate had played its hand. He had come too late. When Huayan took a deep breath and calmed himself. It's okay. There will be more chances in the future. He didn't understand why, even after Tang Cheng had aborted his child, he still couldn't let her go. The Duke of Zhenguo looked approving. What truth? His grandson was still very much alive after all. But he couldn't expose Tang Cheng's lie. Once again, he made a mental note to remember Madame Min's actions. Marquis of Nanyang smiled quietly. Seeing the Duke of Zhenguo's expression, he knew the Duke had realized that Chang'er hadn't actually aborted the child. Everything was under his control. Marquis of Nanyang didn't want to risk making things worse. When Huayan was destined to be his son-in-law, getting engaged right now is impossible. Let's talk again next year. If you haven't changed your mind by then and I haven't found someone else, we'll go ahead with the engagement. Father, do you agree? Tang Cheng had already considered Wen Huayan as her top choice for a husband. After all, he was the father of her child. She gave him her word. It was just a few months. Once her belly started to show, they wouldn't be able to hide it anymore. Marquis of Nanyang had no objections. As long as Chang'er is happy with her decision. The Duke of Zhenguo and Wen Huayan immediately agreed. The official matchmaker was left dumbfounded. So what exactly was she here for? From start to finish, it wasn't really her business. She had merely been a spectator to the spectacle. The Marquis of Nanyang group left feeling somewhat satisfied. At least they knew that Tang Cheng hadn't aborted the Duke's grandchild. Once outside the Marquis gates, the Duke of Zhenguo privately informed Wen Huayan of the situation. Wen Huayan smiled, his face filled with excitement and joy, as if something precious had been restored to him. Tang Cheng was such a naughty girl, a little liar. After the news that the Duke of Zhenguo personally went to the Marquis of Nanyang residence to propose marriage, the entire capital was shaken. Tang Cheng quickly became the object of envy and jealousy for all the noble ladies in the capital. Everyone was gossiping and speculating about the outcome of the proposal. Marquis of Nanyang should agree to the marriage this time, especially since the Duke of Zhenguo came in person. That's for sure. Tang Cheng is really fortunate. Who said that? Don't you all remember that Tang Cheng's crush is on the fourth prince? Marquis of Nanyang dotes on his daughter. As long as Tang Cheng doesn't agree, this marriage won't happen. That's a fair point. Stop guessing, everyone. Let's just wait for the result. I really don't understand what makes Tang Cheng so charming that the Duke of Zhenguo would lower himself to propose to her. She's just a spoiled, brainless, uneducated beauty. She's spoiled and brainless with a terrible reputation, but she caught the Duke of Zhenguo's eye. Her luck is better than ours. Haha, exactly. Some people just make you so jealous. Lu Jintong, dressed in men's clothing, sat in the tea house, listening to the surrounding gossip with an extremely unpleasant expression on her face. A well-dressed young man, upon hearing the news from a hurried attendant who had just entered, couldn't help but burst into laughter. Haha, the Duke of Zhenguo has already left the Marquis of Nanyang residence. Do you all want to know the result? The lively tea house suddenly fell silent. Everyone wanted to be the first to know whether the Duke of Zhenguo's proposal had been successful. The result is that the Marquis of Nanyang rejected the Duke of Zhenguo's proposal. Haha. Isn't that surprising? The young man in fine clothes thoroughly enjoyed the looks he was getting from the crowd, grinning smugly. The tea house buzzed again with excitement. Lu Jintong's mood instantly brightened. That fool, Tang Cheng, not only aborted the child of the heir to the Wei family, but also rejected the Duke of Zhenguo's proposal. She really was as brainless as ever, always making a scene. It's just that the Marquis of Nanyang dotes on her, so in the future, she'll end up with a low-status son-in-law coming to their door. Lu Jintong felt quite pleased with herself. The little bit of frustration from her encounter with the eldest son of the Qi family vanished without a trace. Upon hearing that the Duke of Zhenguo had personally proposed but was rejected, Madame Min, the wife of the Duke of Zhenguo, finally relaxed her tense nerves. She quickly wrote a letter to be sent to the Duke of Zhenguo's residence, and then settled in Min's family, waiting for the Duke to send someone to bring her back to the Duke's household. The Min family was a prestigious and well-known family in the capital, though their younger generation was mediocre and not fit for great responsibilities. But thanks to the Duke of Zhenguo's influence, The Min family's younger members lived quite comfortably. As the Duke's wife, Madame Min's return to her family had not been made public. The Marquis of Nanyang had also discreetly reprimanded those in his household, so there were no rumors circulating about the Duke's wife being sent back to her family. The Min family members believed that their esteemed aunt simply wanted to visit her family and stay for a while due to her unhappiness with the matter involving Miss Tang, and so they treated her with great care and respect. Madame Min thoroughly enjoyed the attention and admiration from the Min family, but she longed to return to the Duke of Zhenguo's residence. When she saw the letter she had sent being returned, her heart sank. Fortunately, there were no rumors circulating outside. Madame Min felt a bit relieved and coincidentally, her sister-in-law had invited her to visit the new rouge shop opened by Princess Cheng, so she decided to go and show her support the next day. Madame Min decided it would be a good idea to get some fresh air and clear her mind. Coincidentally, Tang Cheng was also planning to go shopping the next day. Ahem. It's getting late, Marquis of Nanyang. Let me get straight to the point. I've come today to propose in behalf of Huayan. In just a few days, Tang Cheng had become the most talked about figure in the capital's gossip circles. Bored from staying in the mansion all day, she decided to go out and explore the city tomorrow. But now that she was a public figure, she couldn't just go out casually. She needed a carriage for handmaidens in attendance and guards for protection. It had to be a grand affair. Gone were the days when the original Tang Cheng would be sweet-talked by her Shanhu into leaving the house with just one maid. The day she left the estate, the sun was bright, the breeze was gentle. It was the perfect day for a stroll around the city. Miss, the carriage is ready. The steward made all the arrangements, Ling Long announced as she entered, the sound of the beaded curtain tinkling behind her. Tang Cheng, accompanied by her 4 handmaidens, left the peony garden and spotted the elegant little carriage waiting at the gate. The oil paper panels gleamed softly, and pale blue curtains swayed gently in the breeze, releasing a faint, pleasant fragrance that lifted the spirit. Tang Cheng liked it immediately. Lifting the hem of her dress, she climbed into the carriage without hesitation. Let's go, time to hit the streets. The dainty and charming carriage rolled slowly out of the Marquis of Nanyang's residence, making its way toward the busiest, most prosperous part of the capital. The streets bustled with noise and crowds. Shops lined both sides, each one lively and full of energy. With guards flanking the carriage, the group moved down the avenue in a grand, attention-grabbing display. Lounging lazily inside, Tang Cheng nibbled on strawberries while watching the vibrant scene outside with great interest. That's the carriage from the Marquis of Nanyang's estate. I wonder which young miss is inside. There are only 2 unmarried young ladies in the Marquis of Nanyang's household. The one riding in that fancy carriage must be the legitimate 3rd daughter, Miss Tang. Everyone knows the 4th young miss isn't one for grand displays. She's never made such a scene when going out. True. Besides, the 4th young miss recently lost her child. She's probably still recovering at home. I really want to catch a glimpse of this infamous Miss Tang, the one who turned down the marriage proposal from the Duke Zhenguo's estate. Tang Cheng had sharp ears, and the hushed chatter from outside drifted in clearly. The corners of her lips curved upward in amusement. Through the fluttering curtain, her eyes landed on a vendor making sugar figurines. Her gaze lit up with curiosity and excitement. Ling Long, I want one of those pretty sugar sculptures. Go get a few for me. Her clear, pleasant voice rang out from inside the carriage. Yes, Mississippi. Please wait a moment. The carriage came to a stop. Ling Long lifted the curtain and stepped down, soon returning with several sugar figurines in hand. Tang Cheng happily munched on the sweets, buying anything along the way that caught her eye: food, trinkets, fun little things, whatever she liked, she bought without hesitation. Her 4 handmaidens were unfamiliar faces, unlike her former maid Shanhu, whose looks were widely recognized. So everyone simply assumed the young miss in the carriage was the 3rd daughter, Miss Tang. Street vendors all showered her with compliments and sweet talk. Tang Cheng was thoroughly enjoying her outing, when suddenly, another voice from outside caught her attention. I heard there's a new cosmetics shop opening on West Street. It's said to be owned by Princess Consort Cheng. Lots of noble ladies are planning to show their support. Should we go take a look? Tang Cheng wasn't particularly interested. Her exquisite carriage continued to roll through the streets in grand fashion, stopping frequently for her to shop, drawing countless stares. Before long, Word had spread across the marketplace about the generous Miss Tang from the Marquis of Nanyang's household. Wherever her carriage passed, vendors eagerly shouted to attract her attention. And whenever she saw something she liked, Tang Cheng bought it without hesitation. Just then, her elegant carriage came face to face with a lavishly decorated one coming from the opposite direction. The ornate carriage bore the emblem of the Min family. By coincidence, inside sat Madame Min, the wife of the Duke of Zhenguo, who had come out to get some air. Confronted by the carriage from the Marquis of Nanyang's estate, Madame Min's servants, used to flaunting their power, immediately barked out orders for Tang Cheng to make way. "You and the carriage clear the road. Our miss is in a hurry. Don't block the way." Inside her own carriage, Tang Cheng bristled with anger. Encountering another carriage on a crowded street was a common affair. She'd already come across two today. In both cases, people communicated respectfully and each gave a little ground, parting ways amicably. But now, the people in the Min family's grand carriage were treating her like some pushover, demanding she give way as if they owned the road. Did they really think she was that easy to bully? She might look tame, but that didn't mean she didn't have claws. Tang Cheng was furious. She suddenly flung open the curtain of her carriage, revealing a stunningly beautiful face. With a cold smile she spoke. "Such arrogance. I'm not moving. What are you going to do about it?" "Uncle He, stop the carriage right in the middle of the street. We're not going anywhere. If they've got the guts, let them try and ram into us." It was a face nearly everyone in the capital recognized. The crowd, which had already gathered in anticipation of a spectacle when the two carriages met head-on, was stunned the moment they saw who was inside the elegant carriage. A beat later, the murmurs and excitement erupted among the onlookers. "That's the fourth young miss, Miss Tang. Am I seeing things? That's not the third young miss. It's actually the fourth? Didn't they say she had a miscarriage and was resting at home? Did you all forget about the strength-enhancing tonic? Look at Miss Tang's complexion. She actually seems pretty well. Looking well doesn't mean she's fully recovered. Otherwise, she wouldn't be riding in a carriage. She used to stroll around with just a maid or two, wandering about freely." "You've got a point. Still, isn't Miss Tang being a little too playful? She doesn't seem to care much about her health. Why do you care so much? She eats gourmet food every day. Even if she ends up with lasting ailments, she has access to the finest medicinal herbs." In the crowd, a young woman in men's clothing, Lu Jintong, had originally assumed the person inside the elegant carriage was the third young miss, Miss Tang. She'd been planning how to approach her. But to her surprise, the one inside turned out to be none other than Tang Cheng, that foolish woman. Lu Jintong stared intently at the familiar face inside the carriage. Scenes from her past life flashed vividly in her mind, of being mocked, humiliated, and crushed again and again by this very idiot. A flicker of cold hostility flashed in her eyes. Then suddenly, a bold idea took shape in her mind. Instead of trying to get close to the third young miss, wouldn't it be more useful to approach Tang Cheng? It would be a better way to take revenge. Now that she'd made the decision, she would have to hide all traces of her hatred toward Tang Cheng. Lu Jintong kept telling herself, "Tang Cheng is not your enemy." She repeated it over and over until she could look calmly at the girl in the carriage without her heart surging with resentment. This was the perfect chance to get close to her. A sharp glint flashed in Lu Jintong's eyes. Perhaps it was the power of the female lead's halo at work. Lu Jintong had shifted her target just in time. If she'd tried to get close to Tang Cheng, the transmigrated Tang Cheng would have seen right through her immediately. Back at the other carriage, the arrogant servants who had just shouted for the road to be cleared were suddenly stunned, a flicker of panic flashing across their faces. They had thought it was just the third young miss from the Tang family, someone they could easily push around. Who would have expected it to be the notoriously spoiled and temperamental fourth young miss, the one the Marquis of Nanyang adored beyond reason? This was about to become a scene. The murmurs and chatter from the crowd drifted into the opulent carriage opposite. The Duchess of Zhenguo, Madame Min, looked visibly displeased, her expression tinged with a faint green hue. Her sister-in-law silently cursed their luck. Of all people, they had to run into the notoriously willful and difficult Tang Cheng. What now? Miss Tang refuses to yield the road, and we're pressed for time. Are we really going to turn back and take a detour? Madame Min's sister-in-law frowned. It wasn't that she was afraid of Tang Cheng, but engaging in a public argument with a brainless, spoiled girl would do no good to her own reputation. But Madame Min had been pampered and flattered for over a decade, always the one other made way for. And ever since Tang Cheng caused a scandal that led the Duke to send Madame Min back to her maiden family without a second thought, the grudge had run deep. A grudge she would never forget. Now, facing Tang Cheng's carriage in the middle of the street, if she gave way and backed down, it would spread like wildfire in their social circles. She'd become the butt of every noblewoman's joke. Her dignity as the Duke's wife would be in tatters. We're not going around. We'll just wait her out. I don't believe she can sit there forever. Madame Min's tone was resolute. Her sister-in-law could only sigh silently. So much for visiting the Crown Princess's new cosmetics shop together. Neither side was willing to back down. The standoff dragged on, and the crowd around them continued to grow. Madame Min's sister-in-law was starting to get a headache. Meanwhile, inside the elegant carriage, Tang Cheng noticed the other carriage had also come to a halt. Smirking, she drew the curtain back down and happily continued munching on the snacks she'd just bought. Come on then, let's wait it out together. Tang Cheng had nothing but time on her hands, and plenty of snacks in the carriage. And once she finished eating she could just go out and buy more. The 4 maidservants. Miss, the carriage opposite belongs to the Min family. That's the natal family of the Duchess of Zhenguo, Shinju reported after poking her head out to check the situation. Tang Cheng bit into a sugar-coated hawthorn skewer and asked casually as she chewed. The Duchess of Zhenguo was sent back to her maiden home. Do you think she might be inside that carriage? Probably not, Shinju replied, shaking her head. If she were, she'd have stepped out to scold you by now. But a bold idea suddenly popped into Tang Cheng's mind. She excitedly set down her candied fruit, flung open the curtain again, and with all 4 maidservants watching her in baffled silence, stuck her head out and shouted toward the ornate carriage across the street. Duchess of Zhenguo, I know you're in there. What's wrong? Afraid to show your face? Her voice was laced with pure provocation. At those words the crowd instantly perked up. If the Duchess really was in that carriage, this was about to turn into a spectacle worth watching. Among the onlookers, Lu Jintong narrowed her eyes. The Duchess of Zhenguo. The 4 maidservants. Miss, what if the Duchess of Zhenguo isn't in that carriage? Zhenju asked, rubbing her temples. Tang Cheng shrugged nonchalantly. I was just shouting on a whim. If she's not there, then so be it. No big deal. With how arrogant the Min family's servants are acting, I doubt the person inside is any better. I actually want to see who's being so overbearing. The 4 maidservants. Inside the opposing carriage, the Duchess of Zhenguo, Madame Min, instantly darkened with rage. She gritted her teeth and hissed. How did that Tang girl know I was in here? Maybe she's just bluffing, her sister-in-law offered, trying to downplay the situation. Madame Min narrowed her eyes. I'm going to deal with her myself. You can't. The sister-in-law's expression changed. She hurried to stop her. Yuelon, you mustn't show your face. Min Yuelon, Madame Min, paused for a moment, then let out a cold laugh. Tang Cheng called me out by name, right in front of everyone. If I don't respond, people will say I was too afraid to face her. With that, ignoring all protests, the Duchess of Zhenguo straightened her robes, adjusted her expression and lifted the curtain, only to lock eyes with Tang Cheng's boldly defiant gaze. Oh? So it really is the Duchess of Zhenguo. Looks like I guessed right, Tang Cheng said with mock surprise. No wonder her servants were so arrogant. They're just riding on her coattails. The crowd around them grew visibly excited, thrilled even. The infamous 4th Miss Tang was now confronting the Duchess of Zhenguo in the middle of the street. Please, Miss Tang, mind your words. This was all the servants doing. We acted on our own. It has nothing to do with the Duchess. The servant who had just been acting so high and mighty suddenly went pale when he realized the Duchess was being dragged into it. He immediately dropped to his knees and confessed in a panic. Well said. Unrelated, is it? Tang Cheng's voice was calm but sharp. Even if the Duchess didn't give the order, she certainly didn't stop it, did she? A clear, unfamiliar voice suddenly cut in. The crowd turned in surprise, following the sound to see a strikingly handsome young man standing nearby. But this young man was none other than Lu Jintong, the reborn female lead disguised in men's clothing. Tang Cheng's beautiful almond-shaped eyes lit up with curiosity as she looked at the person who had spoken on her behalf. Interesting. So this dashing young gentleman was actually a girl in disguise. And who might you be? She asked, her tone amused. Lu Jintong gave a carefree smile. Just a passerby who can't stand injustice. Tang Cheng raised an eyebrow in intrigue. The Duchess of Zhenguo, Madame Min, began to feel a subtle unease as she noticed the shift in the crowd's expression. Regret crept in. She shouldn't have stepped out of the carriage. Now that she had, there was no easy way to back down. That shameless, willful fourth Miss Tang had always been good at stirring up trouble. And here, in full view of the public, Min Yuelon had no choice but to maintain her dignity as the Duchess of Zhenguo. Whatever the outcome, nothing about this would end in her favor. And worse, her reputation might suffer. Damn that fourth Miss Tang. She always had a way of breaking her composure. Just as the standoff reached a delicate point, the Min family's elder sister-in-law finally stepped forward. That's enough. This is the Min family's carriage and their servants. Miss Tang, you can clearly see the emblem on the carriage. I know you still hold a grudge over the Duchess of Zhenguo breaking off the engagement, so you're just throwing dirt at her without cause. Madame Min's elder sister-in-law quickly turned the tide in favor of the Duchess. Tang Cheng couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. So what if I hold grudges? The one who stepped forward was the Duchess herself. Everyone saw how those Min servants acted, all arrogant and bullying because of their mistress's status. How am I throwing dirt when I'm just telling the truth? The only one to blame is that you didn't stand up for her from the start. Tang Cheng spoke with complete confidence. Miss Tang is right. Lu Jintong, still disguised as a young man, quickly chimed in to boost Tang Cheng's favor. Tang Cheng gave her a quick glance. The surrounding crowd nodded in agreement, and now it was Madame Min's elder sister-in-law who was receiving the cold stares. Choking on her frustration, Madame Min's sister-in-law silently cursed the stubbornness of the young Duchess. She shot a fierce glare at the trembling servant kneeling before her. The servant shivered in fear. Let's return to the manor, she ordered firmly. She wasn't about to be made a laughingstock here, nor did she care to patronize the newly opened rouge shop of the Princess of Cheng. The Duchess of Zhenguo shared the same mood. The two women sat in silence inside the ornate carriage. Watching the lavish carriage turn and leave, Tang Cheng felt a wave of relief wash over her. After the crowd dispersed, Lu Jintong, still dressed as a young man, approached and gave a thumbs up toward Tang Cheng inside the carriage. Miss Tang, you're really impressive. You're not bad yourself. Is dressing as a guy fun? Tang Cheng smiled warmly at Lu Jintong. The four main maids were stunned. Wait, that handsome young man was actually a woman? Lu Jintong was taken aback. How did Tang Cheng figure it out? She'd always worn male clothes outside the estate without anyone noticing. How did you know? Lu Jintong asked. Tang Cheng lifted her chin arrogantly. My eyes aren't blind. Of course I saw right through it at once. Lu Jintong. So frustrating. Now that her disguise was blown, she couldn't approach Tang Cheng as a boy anymore. She had to change her strategy. Feigning resignation, Lu Jintong smiled. I didn't expect you to have such sharp eyes and see through my disguise so quickly. Miss Tang, I'm Lu Jintong, the legitimate eldest daughter of Count of Jianan. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Tang Cheng. Tang Cheng found it strange that this girl, who introduced herself as Miss Lu Jintong from the Marquis of Jianan's household, was acting so familiar. Tang Cheng, I heard the Princess of Cheng just opened a new cosmetics shop. Want to go check it out together? Lu Jintong asked with a bright, cheerful smile. Tang Cheng popped a strawberry into her mouth. No thanks. I'm not interested in rouge and powders. I'd rather keep strolling around. Lu Jintong. Well, wandering around alone is no fun. I'll join you. Tang Cheng didn't mind. Sure. Although she agreed to walk together, Tang Cheng didn't invite Lu Jintong into her carriage. It was only their first meeting. Who knew what kind of person she really was? Since Lu Jintong didn't know how to ride a horse, she had no choice but to grit her teeth and walk alongside Tang Cheng's elegant carriage through the busy streets. She hadn't even started getting her revenge on Tang Cheng, and her legs were already about to give out. Lu Jintong nearly coughed up blood. That clueless Tang Cheng didn't even think to offer her a seat in the carriage. Did Tang Cheng, sitting comfortably in her ornate carriage, really not notice Lu Jintong's situation? Of course she noticed. She wasn't blind. She simply chose to ignore it. She was, after all, a well-known figure in the capital now. Though she had no friends, she didn't crave companionship. The few friends of the original Tang Cheng had all vanished without a trace after the scandal of her losing her chastity and falling pregnant. As for Lu Jintong, this pampered high-born young lady from a marquis's household, her endurance was truly impressive, enough to make anyone take notice but perhaps too impressive. Her determination gave off a calculating air. Still, as long as she didn't try to play tricks on her, Tang Cheng didn't care whether someone was scheming or not. She neither liked nor disliked such people. In her past life, despite her fertility score being 0, her powerful family background meant that there was never a shortage of people trying to curry favor with her. She had seen too many like that to be surprised anymore. Trust? Genuine connection? That was a luxury long abandoned. Bored, Tang Cheng decided she might as well see what kind of game this Miss Lu was playing. Lu Jintong, meanwhile, had no idea she had completely miscalculated. If she found out, she might just cough up blood from sheer frustration. The carriage rolled leisurely along the street, slow enough that even an exhausted Lu Jintong could keep up. News traveled fast among the common folk. By now, all the street vendors had heard about the embarrassing misunderstanding. Turns out the lady in the elegant carriage wasn't the reputable third Miss Tang, but the scandal-ridden fourth Mississippi. Yet that did nothing to dull their enthusiasm. On the contrary, the fourth Miss Tang had a reputation for being generous with her silver whenever something caught her eye. The vendors could only hope she'd take a liking to their wares. And so, a rather strange scene unfolded along the bustling street. Wherever the ornate carriage of the Marquis of Nanyang's household passed, the surrounding vendors erupted into loud, excited shouts, full of enthusiasm. Lu Jintong could only watch helplessly as Tang Cheng happily shopped and snacked to her heart's content. Every time Lu Jintong strived to strike up a conversation, one of the maids would rudely cut her off. It was frustrating, maddening even, and made worse by the non-stop chatter between Tang Cheng and her 4 endlessly talkative maids. "Miss, that vendor just called you beautiful and kind. Miss, another one said you're like a goddess descended from heaven. Miss, someone just wished you a long, healthy life. Miss, everyone's praising you today. What can I say?" Tang Cheng replied, feigning modesty. "I have good character and people just love me. Honestly, I'm blushing from all the compliments. Oh, and that vendor who said I'm a heavenly fairy. His snacks were delicious. Go buy everything from his stall and hand it out to the guards outside." "Yes, miss." The more Lu Jintong heard, the more irritated she became. If she'd known it would be like this, she never would have agreed to tag along with this dim-witted woman. It was exhausting both physically and mentally. Those vendors were nothing but money-hungry flatterers, clearly showering Tang Cheng with insincere praise just to earn her silver. Listening to it all was pure torture. And yet, she had to keep her expression perfectly composed, not showing a single crack. Inside the carriage, the 4 maids continued their lively commentary on the vendors' compliments while Tang Cheng munched contentedly on street snacks. Seeing the sweat-soaked and exhausted Miss Lu outside, one of the maids, Shanhu, suddenly seemed to have a rare pang of conscience. Miss Lu has been walking for quite a while. Should we invite her into the carriage to rest?" At those words, the exhausted Lu Jintong, trudging alongside the ornate carriage, suddenly perked up. But Tang Cheng replied in a voice full of feigned surprise. "Shanhu, didn't you notice Miss Lu is dressed in men's clothing? If I were to invite her into my carriage, who knows what scandalous rumors would start flying. My reputation is already in tatters, I don't mind, but Miss Lu is different. Gossip spreads like wildfire. We can't risk ruining her good name." Shanhu put on an expression of sudden realization. "You're absolutely right, Mississippi." The other 3 maids exchanged glances, the corners of their mouths twitching as they struggled not to laugh. "Miss, if only you could wipe that amused smile from your eyes, you might actually sound sincere." Truth be told, all 4 of them were wary of this Miss Lu from the Count of Jiannan's household, who had suddenly appeared and seemed so eager to stand up for their mistress. In fact, Shanhu had asked that question on purpose. Had their lady shown even the slightest intention of inviting Lu Jintong into the carriage, She would have had a perfectly good reason to object. Fortunately, their lady had no such intention. Outside, Lu Jintong's expression twisted ever so slightly upon hearing Tang Cheng's words. That fool. She was clearly dressed as a man. Wasn't that enough to avoid gossip, even if she was walking beside the carriage? Utterly brainless. It's true what they say. Foolish masters always come with equally foolish servants. Just thinking about having to continue this endless walk made Lu Jintong feel faint. Her vision swam, and she was tempted to throw a tantrum and storm off. But then she remembered the humiliation she had suffered in her past life. She forced herself to endure. No, I need to come up with a plan, she thought grimly. At this rate, her legs might give out completely. Shanhu, I just noticed Miss Lu is sweating, Tang Cheng suddenly said with concern. Why didn't you tell me? That's very careless of you. Quick, pour her a cup of tea to help her cool down. She then called out to Uncle He, the coachman, to stop the carriage. Shanhu looked aggrieved. I didn't see it either, Mississippi. Could she admit she'd ignored it on purpose? Of course not. Tang Cheng let out a relieved sigh. Oh, so you didn't see either. Good. At least we still have time to make it right. The carriage came to a gentle stop. Shanhu poured a cup of tea and offered it to the weary Lu Jintong. Miss Lu, please have some tea. Lu Jintong had overheard everything between Tang Cheng and her maid. Her chest tightened in fury. There was no way those four maids hadn't noticed her miserable state. They'd been sneaking glances at her this whole time. They did it on purpose. Those four little vipers definitely did it on purpose. Her chest rose and fell rapidly with suppressed anger. But to get closer to Tang Cheng, she had no choice but to grit her teeth and endure it. As she accepted the tea, she even forced a smile and thanked that oblivious fool with a show of sincerity. In her mind, Lu Jintong didn't believe for a moment that Tang Cheng had done any of this intentionally. In her previous life, Tang Cheng had always been a self-centered, tactless and reckless woman. That impression was deeply ingrained in her. And with that biased conviction clouding her judgment, Lu Jintong automatically shifted all the blame onto the maids. Tang Cheng lifted the curtain of the carriage and handed Lu Jintong, who was still holding the teacup, a clean handkerchief. She even gave her a thumbs up. Miss Lu, I truly admire you. A proper young lady from a noble family, walking such a long distance without a single complaint. You must be in excellent shape. In truth, Tang Cheng found Lu Jintong's stubborn endurance completely baffling. Either the girl had an ulterior motive, or she was just plain foolish. If it had been her, she would have walked away without hesitation long ago. Still, Tang Cheng wasn't the type to judge others with the worst intentions. Since Lu Jintong had insisted on tagging along, she figured she might as well show a bit of praise, offer a few words of encouragement and call it a day. Lu Jintong took a deep breath, handed back the teacup, and accepted the handkerchief. But when she heard Tang Cheng say she admired her, something caught in her chest. Admire her? If it weren't for the need to get close to Tang Cheng, she'd never have subjected herself to this torment. Still, thinking about how Tang Cheng had to ride in the carriage because of her post-abortion condition gave her a bit of grim satisfaction. Fine, keep playing the fool. Let's see how long you can keep it up. It'd be best if she ruined her health completely. Then she'd never be able to pop out one child after another like she did in the last life. Lu Jintong deliberately ignored the healthy flush on Tang Cheng's cheeks. Tang Cheng, your situation's a bit special. I'm used to dressing in men's clothes and walking around like this. My body's just a little stronger, that's all. But even I'm reaching my limit. It's already midday. Why don't we find a restaurant and grab a bite to eat together? Too tired to walk another step, Lu Jintong came up with this plan. Once they were at the restaurant, she'd order a whole table of dishes, colorful, fragrant, and delicious, yet completely unsuitable for a woman recovering from a miscarriage. Knowing Tang Cheng's love of good food, she'd definitely be tempted to dig in. Lu Jintong's scheme was unfolding perfectly in her mind. But Tang Cheng blinked at her with wide, innocent eyes. Why don't you go ahead without me? I've been eating all morning. I'm stuffed. Besides, you're dressed in men's clothing right now. It wouldn't look proper if we went to a restaurant together. Lu Jintong. She was on the verge of losing it. Why is Tang Cheng so infuriatingly difficult to deal with? She'd worn out her legs walking alongside this woman all morning, and yet Tang Cheng still had that same airhead, carefree attitude that made people want to scream. To make things worse, Tang Cheng even waved at her cheerfully. "Miss Liu, you go ahead and get something to eat. I'm heading off." With that, she decisively dropped the curtain and ordered the coachman to drive on. She left. Just like that she left. Lu Jintong stared after the dainty, elegant carriage, flanked by guards as it rolled farther and farther away, completely stunned. She almost coughed up blood from sheer frustration. She took a deep breath and tried to console herself. At least all that walking hadn't been completely in vain. They were now acquaintances, and she could find more opportunities to grow closer in the future. The nearby street vendors, watching the well-dressed young man, abandoned by the infamous fourth Miss Tang, looked on with pity. One of them kindly offered a word of advice. "Young master, best not pin your hopes on the fourth Mississippi. She's sweet on the fourth prince." The rest chimed in quickly with agreement. "That's right, young master. You might be handsome, but that slender frame of yours doesn't even compare to the once sickly young Lord One, let alone the noble fourth prince." Fourth Miss Tang didn't even spare a glance for young Lord One, "So you'd best not get your hopes up. Time to face reality." These onlookers, standing at a distance, hadn't heard the exchange between Tang Cheng and Lu Jintong. None of them realized that the dashing young man was actually a woman. Just as Lu Jintong had finally calmed her breathing, those words nearly made her cough up blood. She clenched her fists and stormed off, her steps brisk with frustration. In the meantime, gossip in the capital gained a few new twists, thanks to the mysterious heartbroken young man abandoned by the infamous fourth Miss Tang. Lu Jintong, under her male disguise, became an unexpected sensation. Tang Cheng, on the other hand, was thoroughly satisfied with her morning outing. She'd nearly wandered through every bustling street in the capital. At last, she gave a generous wave of her hand to the largest bookshop in the city. By now, she had completely forgotten about Lu Jintong. The name of fourth Miss Tang was already notorious. With her at the center of so many recent rumors, the moment she stepped into the bookshop with her 4 handmaids, she drew everyone's attention. The shopkeeper's head throbbed the instant he saw her infamous, unstudious figure enter. "What on earth is she doing in a bookstore?" "Shopkeeper," Tang Cheng declared with cheerful directness, "they say reading makes people smarter. I'll take your best travelogues and romance novels." The corner of the shopkeeper's mouth twitched. Right. Inside the bookshop, several customers had perked up their ears to eavesdrop. Upon hearing what fourth Miss Tang said, a few scholars couldn't hold back their laughter. Their ridicule was obvious, mocking her as an empty-headed girl trying to act cultured. They snickered that she didn't even know how to pretend at refinement. Reading every travelogue and romantic tale in the store still wouldn't make her any wiser. The 4 maids' expressions darkened instantly. Just as they were about to speak up in defense, Tang Cheng held them back with a raised hand. She calmly turned to the mocking scholars, lifting her chin slightly as she faced them head-on. "Travelogues broaden one's horizons and expand the mind," she said coolly. "But I suppose some people here have never read a single one. No wonder their view of the world is so narrow and their temper even narrower. For suppose scholars, mocking a young woman who has nothing to do with you in front of everyone. Have you no shame?" She added with a biting smile, "Some scholars. Clearly, all your learning went straight to the dogs." The group of men who had just mocked her flushed with embarrassment and anger, completely speechless under her direct gaze. Others in the shop who hadn't joined in the mockery couldn't help but chuckle. This fourth Miss Tang has quite the venomous tongue. The shopkeeper could only sigh silently. No wonder the heir apparent favors her. What unique taste. "Miss," Shinju asked hesitantly, "what about the romance stories?" "Those," Tang Cheng replied, lips curving into a smirk. "Those are just for fun. It's amusing to see what kinds of absurd daydreams these so-called talented scholars come up with." As she finished, she deliberately glanced at the group who had laughed at her before. They turned an even deeper shade of red. The bookshop owner fell silent, his face twisting slightly. The 4 maids struggled to hold back their laughter. "Miss, what you said makes perfect sense." Fourth Miss Tang's words had hit a nerve, too blunt, too pointed. Wouldn't it be better to see through it but keep quiet? Some less than pure-hearted scholars grew furious and shouted, "That's sophistry. Nonsense." Tang Cheng ignored them completely. Instead, She looked to the shopkeeper as he began bringing over travelogues and romance storybooks for her to choose from. Before long, Tang Cheng had picked out quite a stack. "Shopkeeper, how much do I owe you?" The owner smiled warmly. "No charge, Miss Tang. These travelogues and storybooks are on the house." The heir had given strict instructions. Anything forth Miss Tang fancied at his shop was to be gifted outright. Tang Cheng frowned. "I don't like taking advantage of others. Shopkeeper, just tell me the price of these books." The owner chuckled. "Miss Tang," the heir insisted, "whenever you buy books here, they're always free." "Miss, this bookshop belongs to Lord Wan," Zhenju couldn't help but mention. Tang Cheng stiffened at the name of Wan Huaiyan, her child's father, and insisted on paying anyway. The shopkeeper fell silent, as did the scholars around them. Hadn't fourth Miss Tang already refused the Duke of Zhenguo's second marriage proposal? In the end, the shopkeeper accepted payment, and Tang Cheng paid before leaving the shop. Word of what happened at the bookshop quickly spread, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. When Wan Huaiyan heard about Tang Cheng's exploits, he was utterly speechless. Just then, a trusted servant hurried in with bad news. "Your Highness, trouble. The Marquis of Nanyang is gathering information on the talented young men in the capital." Wan Huaiyan's handsome face darkened like the bottom of a pot. She said she'd think it over. It hadn't even been a full day, and the Marquis of Nanyang was already itching to compile dossiers on promising young talents for that light-hearted girl Tang Cheng. If Tang Cheng actually set her sights on one of those young men, wouldn't my child end up with another stepfather? Is the information reliable? Are you sure it's not just a rumor? Wan Huaiyan's voice was laced with suppressed fury, as if he were gritting his teeth. "It's not a rumor, it came straight from the Marquis of Nanyang himself," the servant replied cautiously. He didn't dare lift his head to look at the young lord's expression. As Wan Huaiyan's most trusted aide, he naturally knew about Miss Tang's faked miscarriage. The Marquis of Nanyang was truly being unreasonable. Miss Tang was still carrying the young lord's child, after all. "Send someone to keep a close eye on Tang Cheng and the Marquis of Nanyang's residence," Wan Huaiyan ordered coldly. Just thinking about Tang Cheng's carefree nature made his blood pressure rise. He could already picture his child happily calling another man father. Determined to prevent that possibility, he decided to apply a full-court press. Every threat must be eliminated. If one comes, take him down. If two come, take down both. The loyal servant. "Yes, young lord. You're dismissed." When Huaiyan waved him off, still wearing a stormy expression as he turned and headed to the study to deal with official matters. Of course, the Duke of Zhenguo was already aware of the Marquis of Nanyang's actions. Nothing escaped his attention. He summoned his son, and as he looked at the tall, elegant, and striking young man before him, he felt both pride and quiet regret. His son's difficulty in producing an heir remained unresolved. "Huaiyan, I assume you've already heard the news that the Marquis of Nanyang is gathering information on eligible young men?" the Duke asked, getting straight to the point. When Huaiyan's handsome face darkened slightly. "I have." The Duke of Zhenguo noticed the subtle change in his son's expression, and couldn't help but find it amusing. He saw right through the Marquis of Nanyang's intentions. Though his son was being played, the Duke felt no anger. The Marquis was just acting out of fatherly love. Tang Cheng was clearly a light-hearted, carefree girl with a fondness for good looks. At the very least, his son's face had caught her eye. Even if there were other young men just as handsome, unless they were from declining noble families or were born of concubines, none of them would stand a real chance at climbing the social ladder to marry into the Marquis's household. His son's position wasn't so easily threatened, so the Duke wasn't worried in the slightest. Of course, he wasn't about to tell his son that. If he exposed the Marquis's intentions too early, the man might change his plans. And without the Duke's behind-the-scenes maneuvering, if that girl Tang Cheng actually fell for someone else, his grandson might really end up with a stepfather. It wasn't so bad, watching from the sidelines as his son and that little girl tangled with each other. Who knew? Something real might come out of it. That said, the Duke wasn't about to just sit back and watch. He would give things a helpful push when the time was right. Naturally, the true culprit behind this whole situation, his wife Madame Min, was once again dragged out and thoroughly scolded in his mind, earning yet another extension on her indefinite exile from the manor. What do you plan to do? The Duke asked, eyeing his son. Wen Huaiyan pressed his thin lips together. As far as outsiders were concerned, his engagement to Tang Cheng had been broken, the child had been lost, and from now on, their paths as man and woman should be entirely separate. What could he do? Keep a very, very close eye on her. The Duke of Zhenguo listened to his son's plan, exactly what the Marquis of Nanyang was hoping for, and a faint, knowing smile flickered in his eyes. That's exactly what you should do. Wen Huaiyan. Why did he suddenly feel like he was being played? Marquis of Nanyang's residence. When the attendant reported that the news had already been spread, the Marquis of Nanyang's lips curved into a mysterious, satisfied smile. All of this scheming, he was doing it for his precious daughter. As a father, he had spared no effort and worried himself sick. If he didn't find a way to keep Wen Huaiyan's attention firmly on his daughter, what if something unexpected happened and the son-in-law he had his eye on slipped through his fingers? Collecting profiles of eligible young men was only the first step. People often say daughters take after their fathers. In this case, it couldn't be truer. If he didn't stir up some trouble for young Lord Wen, he simply couldn't rest easy. Of course, many would likely mock him for wasting his efforts, but so what? He was sure there would be quite a few others who understood his intentions. Cradling a teacup in one hand, the Marquis leaned back in his Wangwali wood chair. His gaze drifted through the lattice window of the study, resting in the direction of the Duke of Zhenguo's residence. His eyes narrowed slightly, his expression thoughtful and profound. The capital really was more interesting when things got lively. Just then a guard outside reported, "My lord, the fourth miss has arrived." The Marquis of Nanyang paused for a moment, the serious expression on his face quickly melting into a warm smile. Let her in. In the past, his precious daughter would barge straight into his study without a second thought whenever she needed something. The fact that she sent someone to announce her arrival this time caught him a little off guard. He couldn't help but feel a touch of amazement. His little girl was growing up. Still, her spirited nature clearly hadn't changed. Thinking about the chaos she'd stirred up today and the teasing remarks from his peers, the Marquis couldn't help but chuckle. His darling daughter really had a talent for making enemies. Those so-called gifted scholars, beloved by noble young ladies and famed for writing flowery tales of romance, were probably cursing her name by now. As soon as Tang Cheng stepped inside, she saw her father laughing. Curious, she leaned in and asked, "Dad, what are you laughing about?" "Chenger, did you have fun today? You didn't eat anything you shouldn't have, did you?" the Marquis asked with a smile. Tang Cheng dragged over her special rosewood chair and sat down beside her father, eyes bright with excitement. "It was great. It was my first time riding in a fancy carriage through the capital. Super fun. Don't worry, Dad, Hoopa was with me. I didn't eat anything I shouldn't." As she spoke, her gaze landed on the tricolor peonies arranged on the desk, and it suddenly reminded her. Tang Cheng was still unbetrothed. "Dad, I heard you're gathering information on promising young men. Tang Cheng's marriage hasn't been arranged yet. Why not give Mother a copy of the list? Oh, and my two brothers are still unmarried too. You might as well go the extra mile and gather a list of eligible young ladies in the capital for them as well." Tang Cheng didn't have any strong feelings toward her stepmother, Madame Zhang, who never meddled in her affairs, so she mentioned her casually and without malice. The Marquis of Nanyang, ever the doting father, was deeply moved that his precious daughter was thinking of her siblings. He reached out and gently patted her head, smiling with satisfaction. "My little Chenger is growing up, already thinking about her brother and sister's future." But Tang Cheng had no intention of rebuilding warm sibling ties. She wasn't here to play the loving sister. A distant, indifferent relationship suited her just fine. "Dad, I'm really just thinking of myself. What if my brothers marry wives who hate me? They'll be giving me the evil eye all day or picking fights. Wouldn't that make living in the house a complete headache?" Tang Cheng stated her selfish motives with complete honesty and unapologetic confidence. The Marquis of Nanyang couldn't help but chuckle at her bold expression. Still, he took note of her words and nodded in agreement. "You're absolutely right. It's best to plan ahead." Pleased, Tang Cheng moved on to the reason she came. "Dad, His Majesty rewarded me with so many wonderful things. I want to enter the palace to express my gratitude. When do you think would be a good day?" The emperor was a powerful backer. Now that she had managed to catch his eye with the enhanced strength potion, Tang Cheng was determined to hold on tight to that support, keeping herself on his radar and building a stronger connection. The Marquis glanced at his daughter's eager face and couldn't help but think of the stench-filled Jingyang Palace. His lips twitched involuntarily. Knowing the emperor as well as he did, he was certain His Majesty had no desire to see his daughter again anytime soon. He cleared his throat lightly. Chenger, His Majesty is very busy with state affairs. He likely doesn't have time to meet you. Tang Cheng looked briefly disappointed, but quickly brightened again. That's fine too. Just make sure you show up in front of him often, Dad. Mention me a few times just so he doesn't forget about his great benefactor. It'd be a real shame if I fell off his radar. The Marquis of Nanyang was speechless. Darling girl, you're seriously underestimating yourself. Don't worry. Even if the emperor forgets everyone else, he'll never forget you. Who dared to fall asleep right outside the imperial study? That was you. Who turned the Jingyang Palace into a stinking disaster? Still you. In the end, the doting Marquis of Nanyang gave in and agreed to her request. Only then did Tang Cheng leave for the Peony Garden satisfied. On the way she ran into Tang Xian. As soon as Tang Xian saw her she said nothing, just took her maid and deliberately detoured around her. All she left Tang Cheng with was a graceful silhouette disappearing into the distance. Tang Cheng. Zhenju, am I really that scary? She asked, gently touching her own smooth, delicate cheek. She tilted her head, clearly unconvinced. I think I look quite nice. Zhenju quickly replied. Miss, you're definitely not scary. Third Miss is probably still upset with you. Oh, I see. Bottling up anger is bad for your health. Tang Cheng spoke casually, then added, Zhenju, send third sister a jar of chrysanthemum tea later to help her cool off. Zhenju. Yes, miss. She couldn't help thinking. If third miss wasn't already fuming, this chrysanthemum tea will definitely push her over the edge. Meanwhile, Tang Xian, who had detoured away earlier, returned to her courtyard with Jin Shu. Her mood slightly improved as she took in the beautiful and rare flowers blooming throughout the garden. Unfortunately, that bit of calm didn't last long. When she received the chrysanthemum tea from Tang Cheng, sent specifically to help her cool down, her expression turned downright stormy. Back in her own courtyard, the completely unbothered Tang Cheng was curled up comfortably with a romantic storybook in hand, utterly unconcerned with the gossip swirling outside. The four maids. Ever since word got out that the Marquis of Nanyang was gathering information on eligible young men for his fourth daughter, Tang Cheng had become the subject of ridicule. Who in their right mind, especially someone with a bright future or a good family, would marry a disgraced, illegitimate daughter of a marquis who's already had a miscarriage? What a disgrace. On top of that, rumor had it that this fourth Miss Tang was absurdly domineering, demanding that her future husband dismiss his entire harem, forbidding him from taking concubines or even handmaids. Who would put up with that? Even if the marquis collected all the most promising names in the capital, it wouldn't change a thing. They were all just waiting for Miss Tang to become an old maid no one wanted. That was the shared wish of all the noble ladies who secretly adored young Lord One. The scholars Tang Cheng had publicly humiliated were especially vicious, gleefully adding fuel to the fire. They mocked her for being brainless and self-destructive, calling her the kind of fool who picks up sesame seeds and drops a watermelon, short-sighted and bound to end up with no choice but to marry into someone else's household as a live-in son-in-law. Plenty of people were waiting to watch her make a fool of herself. Even the emperor in the palace had taken an interest and quietly ordered someone to keep an eye on the situation. Meanwhile, in the Min residence, the Marchioness of Zhenguo, Madame Min, was delighted when she heard the news. Tang Cheng had always been a thorn in her side, and now it looked like that thorn might finally be removed. How could she not be pleased? She silently thanked Tang Cheng for digging her own grave by rejecting the marriage alliance with the Zhenguo Duke's family. Now Xuening had one less formidable rival to worry about. Just then, a carrier pigeon from the Xie family in Jinling arrived with a letter. After reading it, Madame Min's mood lifted even further. Momo, Xuening will be arriving in the capital the day after tomorrow, just in time for the Dowager Consort of Prince Cheng's birthday celebration. Madam, when Miss Xuening arrives, will she be staying here in the Min residence or at the Zhenguo Duke's estate? the trusted Momo asked, eyeing Madame Min's pleased expression but raising a very practical concern. Xuanning is Huayan's cousin, of course she'll stay at the Zhenguo Duke's residence, Madame Min replied matter-of-factly. How else will she and my son deepen their bond? The trusted Momo. Is Madame perhaps being a little too optimistic? Will the Duke agree to this? Madame Min, Marchioness of Zhenguo, paused for a moment. How could he not? The Duke won't take out his anger on Xuanning, just because of me. Right now, she had been sent back to her natal family, and unless the Duke relented, she wouldn't be able to return. If the situation dragged on, news of her being sent back might leak out. Madame Min was growing anxious. She had already made her plans. Once Xuanning arrived in the capital, she would use the excuse of escorting her to the Duke's estate to visit the Duke herself and make her peace. After receiving a letter from the Xie family, Madame Min, the Duchess of Zhenguo, eagerly awaited Xie Xuanning's arrival in the capital. She even sent someone to wait at the city gate in anticipation. Meanwhile, after wandering around the capital yesterday, Tang Cheng had decided to stay in the manor today, curling up with a romance novel featuring talented scholars and beautiful maidens. The 4 senior maids sighed in relief. Thank heavens, the young lady is finally staying in today. Tang Cheng flipped through the pages and muttered. The plot's actually pretty decent, but all these poems and verses are giving me a headache. What's wrong with just speaking normally? Why must they keep tossing in poetry and couplets? The more she read, the more dizzy she felt. The original Tang Cheng had no scholarly background and knew nothing about poetry. The soul currently inhabiting her, a person from a future interstellar empire, was equally clueless about classical verse. She did know that in these romantic stories, the poems were mostly used to praise beauty, express longing or convey sorrow. Thanks to the context, she could grasp the general meaning, but when it came to deciphering the actual poems and poetic exchanges, she was completely lost. The corners of the 4 maids' mouths twitched. Miss, the whole point of these romance novels is the love stories between talented scholars and beautiful maidens. If the scholar can't compose poetry, write couplets or recite verse, or play the zither, play chess or paint and calligraph, how could he possibly be called a talented scholar? If the scholar doesn't flaunt his poetic skills or trade verses with the heroine, these books wouldn't sell at all. No one would read them. Jinju's words hit the nail on the head. Tang Cheng grumpily set the book down, frustration written all over her face. This was already the 5th one she'd tried. Do you think I should find a tutor to teach me poetry and how to write couplets and all that? She turned to look at the 4 senior maids. Jinju. It was good that their young mistress was finally showing some initiative, but she looked at Tang Cheng with undisguised sympathy. Miss, even if you wanted to hire a tutor, no one would be willing to come. Why not? Tang Cheng frowned. Miss, have you forgotten? Every time a new tutor came, you had someone douse them with chamber pot water. After that, no one was willing to come teach you. Just thinking about the pitiful state of those tutors made Jinju shudder. It had been horrifying. In the end, the Marquis had to pay quite a bit in compensation and even went so far as to scold the young lady, which was rare but it didn't last. Soon after, she repeated the same tactic, chasing off yet another tutor with a bucket of filth. Eventually, word got out, and her reputation was ruined. Now, just mentioning a teaching post at the Marquis of Nanyang's estate was enough to make any tutor pale. Tang Cheng. That wasn't me. That was the original Tang Cheng's mess. She rifled through the original owner's memories, and finally found the incident with the chamber pot. So that's what happened. It had been Shanhu, now long dead, who came up with the idea. The original Tang Cheng had only been thinking of playing pranks in class to drive the tutors away, but Shanhu had suggested a permanent solution. With ill intentions, she persuaded Tang Cheng to dump chamber pot water on them. And the original simple-minded Tang Cheng had actually believed her. After successfully driving off the tutors with that stunt, she trusted Shanhu even more. It had only been a few years since the incident, but the original Tang Cheng had caused so many scandals, especially after she started pestering the 4th prince, that over time people had gradually forgotten this particular mess. Tang Cheng. Tang Cheng was at a loss for words. Looks like she was going to have to carry the blame for that mess, no way around it. Just then, a Momo's voice called from outside the door. Miss, young Lord One is here. He says he wishes to see you. Should we let him in? Tang Cheng's eyes lit up. Lord One, that's the baby's father. Isn't that a ready-made tutor right there? Invite young Lord One to the peony garden. She quickly freshened up, grabbed a few romance novels filled with poetic scholars and graceful beauties, and headed to the hall. Behind her, the 4 senior maids couldn't help smiling in delight. They were genuinely happy to see young Lord One. After all, he was the father of their young mistress's unborn child. They had worried before, especially after the Marquis and Miss Tang had merely said they'd consider the marriage proposal from the Duke of Zhenguo's family, that young Lord One might give up. But it turned out he was a responsible man after all. When Huaiyan arrived shortly after, accompanied by a personal attendant, he had recently secured a post as a 5th-rank Wai Lang, gentleman for external affairs, in the Ministry of War. The position was relatively light in duties since he had just started. Today though, when Huaiyan seemed different. The moment he walked in, Tang Cheng was momentarily stunned. He had always been tall and well-proportioned, but now he wore a rose-red official robe embroidered with elegant silver pheasants. A silver fish pouch hung at his waist. The ensemble accentuated his noble bearing, making him look even more refined and striking, like a living embodiment of charm and grace. When Huaiyan, you look so good in your official robes. Tell me the truth, are you doing this on purpose? You're already this good-looking, and yet you keep showing up in front of me. You're raising my standards, you know? Tang Cheng glared at him. Her instincts told her when Huaiyan was up to something. The 4 senior maids were speechless. Their young mistress always manages to focus on the strangest things. When Huaiyan didn't miss the flicker of admiration in Tang Cheng's eyes. The corners of his lips lifted slightly, and when he heard her accusation, he spread his hands in mock helplessness. Tang Cheng, this face was a gift from my parents. If you want to blame someone, I really can't help it. Of course he was doing it on purpose, but he couldn't admit that. Where would his dignity go? Ever since he realized this girl was all about appearances, he'd made a conscious effort to show his face around more often, for the sake of his future child. Heaven forbid some other man end up as the stepfather. It was a noble sacrifice, really. When Huaiyan once again felt grateful for his exceptionally handsome face. After all, this girl did judge people by their looks. And he felt a bit wrong, too. He could rely on his family background, his talent, even his official position, but no, now he had to rely on his face. Tang Cheng stared at Wen Huaiyan's ridiculously handsome features. Fair enough, he had a point. With his looks and physique, anything he wore would naturally look good. A young master like him, tall, striking, and from such a distinguished family, could draw admiration just by standing still. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, she thought. Still, something about it didn't sit quite right with her. Wen Huaiyan, did you come here for something? Tang Cheng decided not to dwell on that strange feeling and asked curiously instead. Wen Huaiyan sat down naturally across from her, picked up the tea Zhenju had brewed, and took a leisurely sip. With a faint smile, he replied, "No reason in particular. I had some errands outside the city, and on the way back I thought I'd stop by to see you." Behind him, his attendant silently grumbled, "Young Lord Wen is lying through his teeth. He went out of his way to come here. Plenty of people could testify to that." Tang Cheng rested her chin in her hand, smiling sweetly as she exposed his lie. Wen Huaiyan, that whole just passing by excuse. Totally unconvincing. Who did he think he was fooling? She just toured the capital yesterday. The Marquis of Nanyang's estate was surrounded by government residences. The Duke of Zhenguo's estate and the Ministry of War were in the opposite direction, on completely different streets. How exactly was this on the way? He had clearly gone out of his way just to see her, yet still insisted it was on the way. If you like me, just say so already. Ancient people really are too reserved. Tang Cheng's lips curved into a smile. Her mood instantly lifted. The 4 maids, the attendant. When Huaiyan gave a soft cough, he hadn't expected Tang Cheng to be so direct. Since he'd been caught red-handed, he decided there was no point in pretending. "You're right, I couldn't fool you. I did come here especially to see you. And the child." The last few words never made it past his lips. "I understand. I totally get it." Tang Cheng beamed at him, then casually picked up a romance novel. "Actually, your timing's perfect. I've been meaning to ask, do you know how to compose poetry or match couplets?" When Huaiyan replied modestly, "I know a little." Tang Cheng's smile vanished as she immediately set the book down, disappointed. Oh, so you're just as clueless as I am. Wen Huaiyan, the attendant. The 4 senior maids struggled to keep from laughing. Young Lord Wen was clearly being too modest, and now he'd been underestimated by their mistress. There are rumors that the heir of the Duke of Zhenguo is a well-read genius, full of literary brilliance. Turns out that's all exaggerated nonsense, Tang Cheng said with a sigh. Just like the rumors about me. Everyone says my head's full of air, or worse, straw or water. But honestly, I have a bit of learning in me too. She nodded solemnly. Good thing I decided to verify it myself. Wen Huaiyan. No, I was just being humble. And from that moment on, he vowed he would never be modest in front of Tang Cheng again. The attendant struggled to hold back a laugh. Poor young Lord Wen. Even someone as composed as him couldn't escape unscathed when faced with a girl as blunt and direct as 4th Miss Tang. The 4 senior maids also couldn't help but stifle their laughter, quietly sympathizing with him. Note to self. Never be modest in front of Miss. She'll take every word at face value. There is some truth in those rumors, you know, Wen Huaiyan muttered under his breath. Like me, for example. He took a deep breath to compose himself. Tang Cheng, however, waved a hand dismissively. Nah, anything people say about the 2 of us is clearly blown out of proportion. Totally unreliable. Since someone as brilliant, as Wen Huaiyan only dabbled in poetry, Tang Cheng concluded that poetry and couplets were probably just way too hard. As a time traveler from a futuristic empire wrapped in an ancient girl's skin, she figured it wasn't worth the pain of learning. Better to save herself the trouble. Wen Huaiyan. Fine. Lesson learned. His eyes drifted to the stack of romance novels beside her. Remembering the way he'd roasted a few self-important scholars the day before, a smile tugged at his lips. He sipped his tea, then asked curiously, Tang Cheng, after reading all these romantic tales, do you realize how ridiculous those so-called gifted scholars are in their daydreams? Wen Huaiyan was genuinely curious about what was going on inside Tang Cheng's head. Of course I know, she said bluntly. Those so-called talented scholars just want to marry some rich, gullible daughter of a wealthy or official family so they can live the high life. Wen Huaiyan almost choked on his tea. Wow, that's harsh. But spot on. She had just ripped off the pretty veneer of those romantic stories. Am I wrong? Most of these scholars in the tales are good-looking but come from poor backgrounds and are incredibly talented. The beauties they chase after are either wealthy daughters of noble families, official households, or expensive courtesans who spend money like water. The common thread? They're all loaded. Tang Cheng frowned and shot Wen Huaiyan a sidelong glance. He smiled, pleased. No, you're absolutely right. The future father-in-law's shortlist of eligible young men was about to get a lot shorter. Only those with good family backgrounds and handsome faces would remain. They probably wouldn't marry Tang Cheng. What a pleasant surprise. Of course there might be exceptions. The attendant thought quietly. Though harsh, 4th Miss Tang's words do ring true. Come to think of it, plenty of wealthy or noble daughters, influenced by these romance tales, have indeed foolishly married poor scholars, then naively used their dowries to support their husbands' families. The 4 senior maids nodded in agreement. Their mistress was remarkably insightful. Tang Cheng was pleased to have Wen Huaiyan's agreement. Tang Cheng, are you free to visit the Duke of Zhenguo's estate tomorrow? There's a big surprise waiting. Wen Huaiyan glanced at the time and finally revealed the real reason for his visit. What kind of surprise? Tang Cheng's eyes brightened, intrigued. You'll see when you get there. Wen Huaiyan smiled mysteriously, deliberately teasing her curiosity as he led her toward the Duke's estate. Rumors about Tang Cheng and the 4th prince had been swirling outside, detailed and vivid, and Wen Huaiyan couldn't help but feel uncomfortable, like a dark cloud hanging over his head. He decided to redirect the gossip onto himself and Tang Cheng. Once he personally escorted Tang Cheng to the Duke of Zhenguo's estate tomorrow, all those rumors about 4th Miss Tang and the 4th prince would be completely dismissed. Tang Cheng's curiosity was piqued. After all, she had nothing better to do. It was just a trip to the Duke's estate. She was in. All right, I'll go see this so-called big surprise. Wen Huaiyan wore a confident smile. Don't worry, I won't let you down. I'll come pick you up right after court tomorrow. Tang Cheng was indifferent. Meanwhile, when Huaiyan was still planning a grand surprise for her, unaware that his mother, Madame Min of the Duke's household, was already preparing a very different kind of big surprise for him tomorrow.